Hello everyone, welcome to an intro to D3.js. We're going to discuss the basics of D3, how it works, kind of understanding what's underneath the hood a little bit, and then we're going to build a bar chart together. So we are going to discuss, I'll give you a brief introduction to D3. I'm going to share some D3 examples that'll give you ideas of what's possible with D3. And then we're going to create a bar chart using div elements. And then I'm going to share some D3 resources that'll be either in the presentation or in the comments below. So D3 stands for data-driven documents. Those are the D3s, the 3Ds. There we go. There's the GitHub link below where you can get the source for D3 as well as helpful API references and tutorials. Again, D3 is a way to visualize data that might equal creating divs on a page related to data points. It may be an SVG that you create. You can visualize anything in the world. And the wonderful thing about D3 is it's so open, and there's many different things that can be done, and there are many helper functions that D3 provides to visualize things in a way that's outside of Google Charts or High Charts. Not dissing on those libraries, but you're locked into one way of doing it with a few parameters that you're locked into versus D3 where you can do anything in the world that you want. Okay, let's look at a few D3 samples. I play tennis myself, so this one's a pretty cool one for me. Very similar to Isotope, if you've ever heard of that library. Isotope organizes things based on filters and can dynamically resort as you click different categories. For example, when I click sets 1, notice that all the tiles switch to their different positions based on the new values. You can also make some selections on this. It's interactive, so I can look at Djokovic and Murray, and then maybe look what Fowler does. And then as I click, those either move or don't move. These guys are too good. They don't move around enough. So let's pick different ones. We switch. We'll see that they tiles switch in many different areas. So anyway, it's a very cool example of D3 and standard JavaScript, which can handle animating these tiles, basically different X and Y values based on what position they are in. That's a cool example. Here's one that's not the traditional chart. Again, D3 is not just a charting library. The cool thing about this is that it can visualize different kind of data in many different creative ways. So this is showing the correlation between different careers and who they marry. Larger width is the person that is in that profession. So in this case, the larger pink means more women are curators, a museum, and they're married to other individuals. So anyway, and then the blue line will point to the male is in that profession. So again, a crazy visualization generating these SVG lines dynamically pointing to the other careers that they're generally correlated to marrying one another. And then this circle is that they actually marry within their profession. So if they don't have a circle, they generally don't marry within profession. Food service managers, they marry each other a lot, I guess. All right, interesting. Let's move on. So here's an electoral map. Again, D3 visualizes data and then can actually transition the data into a different view to give you kind of another picture. That's the awesome thing that D3 gives you as well. We'll get into transitions on a future video. But here's one such transition. When I click next and go to a different map, it will then take these states, turn them into bubbles, and then put them in their categories of what side they're on. In this case, this was 2012 election, Romney and Obama. And then as I step through, you'll see different animations of who's going on what side at what point in the election. So again, a very cool way to visualize and see data over time and how that might interact. And you can see I can hover over each of these and get more information. All right, again, it doesn't always have to be a database or data. The data can be time. And here's a representation creating a clock, polar clock, based on current date and time. Yet another non-traditional chart is donut multiples, where you're actually creating a separate donut chart for different states. So all 50 states are represented in the different age groups within each state, all 50 states. And it just spits out all of these charts dynamically. Pretty cool. All right, let's learn a little bit more about D3, and let's talk about data joins, which is a critical concept of D3. In D3, a data join is where you have you're merging data and elements and figuring out, do I have more data than I have elements? Then I need to create an element, and that is the enter join. So unbound data produces the inner selection, which represents missing elements. So I have 5 sets of data. It's the first time I'm getting this 5 sets of data. I need to hit the inner selection and create these 5 elements. Next is the update join, and that D3 will detect which elements already have data. So I already have 5 sets of data. 3 of them change their values. Maybe I have, I don't know, item 1, item 2, item 3. All 3 of those update. Maybe 4 and 5 stay the same. There is no update. So the update gets fired because there has been a change of that data. And then it will correspond to any existing elements that exist and then update that. This will be more clear as we see an example in just a moment. And then the last join is the exit. We're not going to be using that today, but we will do an example of that on transitions further. And I'm going to show you an example of that now. So unbound elements produce the exit selection, and those are elements to be removed from the page because the data is no longer there. All right, so here's the joins. You see elements in green are the items just coming in. The letters in black are letters that have been updated, and those are just shifting position. And then letters that are no longer in the data set are the items in red that are going down below, and then they're getting removed from the DOM. So again, green coming in, new data. Black is a changed item, and then red are items that are no longer in the data set and getting removed. Here's the bar chart that we're going to build today. It is based on div elements. You'll see that this chart div has divs within it that have a class of bar. Each of these then have a width, a percentage width based on the value. All right, and also you can see that since this is using divs and percentages, then it is a responsive chart. All right, let's go to our starter code and we'll build this from scratch. Now you can see that our element demo chart div is now empty. All right, so looking at our HTML, we have the demo container, And then we have the chart div that we're going to be creating our chart within. All right, so first thing in D3 is to actually load the library that we're going to use. So I'm loading that here on line 18. And then we're loading our custom code to create our chart. And that is this bar chart-divs.js file. Currently, you'll see that the bar chart divs.js has no code in it, which is why nothing's happening over here yet. The data that we're using today is a TSV file. D3 loads a number of different formats from XML, JSON data, comma separated CSV files, and then this is a tab separated value. You could see that each of the columns are separated by tabs. All right, so let's jump into our JavaScript. The first thing we want to do is create a closure to protect our code, create our own scope. If you're not aware of a closure or what it is, it's pretty much just protecting your code from other variables outside. And if you need more info, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube and on the internet. Just Google it and you'll be set. Or, of course, you could comment below and I could provide any links that you might need. All right, so starting with our chart, we are going to first have a reference to our chart that we're going to start. Now, D3, as we saw a little bit of selections and joins, we're going to use a D3.select. And that is much like the jQuery find. It's finding an element, and it's finding any element with a CSS selector. In this case, we're going to use the .chart to look for an element with the class chart in it. As we can see, our div that we want has class chart. All right, so we have a reference to our element that we're wanting to manipulate and create visualizations in. The next thing we need to do is actually get the data. So D3 has many different helper functions, and one is a TSV. It takes a parameter, which is the first parameter is the path to the data. All right. And then the second parameter is the return, and it's a function which has a reference to what's returned, and that's the data. I'm going to go ahead and close that off with a semicolon. All right, now jumping back in here. We need to manipulate our data a lot of times as you get data read in, especially TSV files and CSV or comma separated files. We don't have anything that references that as a number, so the numbers may come in as strings. So we're going to coerce to number. So we're going to manipulate the data, transform it however you may need, and then manipulate it from there. So we actually have a for each function in D3 that we can loop over the data. And then as you'll see this in many places in D3. You always pass in a reference to the actual data point, data value, using a D as a reference. And then we take what data comes in, D.value in this case, and then we add a plus operator to that same value, and that will coerce or convert it to a number. Now, we could do this the same way without the plus. We could, let's see, we could take that out, and we could just hard code it this way to a number. Both of them do the same thing. It's just the plus sign is a lot shorter and works. Okay, so as you can see, we're converting our values here, which this value column are all these numbers, but they come in by default read as a string, and we're now converting those to numbers. Very important when we're starting to manipulate or do calculations of math, and we need to make sure that we're working with numbers, not text strings. The joys of JavaScript. All right, so another thing that we need to do is we need to figure out what our maximum value is in this entire data set. The reason we need to do that is we're wanting to scale the bar chart to percentage widths, and that percentage is based on whatever the max value is. We want, if the max value is 1,000, we want that to be 100% of our container over here in the chart. So we want to calculate what that max is, and that value will always be 100%, and any value less will be a percentage from 0, in between 0 and 100. All right, so let's go ahead and set up that variable. We're going to call it maxVal. MaxVal, not malval. D3 has plenty of these helper functions for getting values, and there's a D3.max, and then you can give it the data set that you want to get the max for, and it'll go ahead and create all the loop. We don't have to loop over an array and do all this complicated stuff. D3 already has that built in, and we'll take use of it. All right, so we've passed in our data. We're looping over each entry point in the data set, and then we're going to return the value that we get that equals the max. So it will loop over, figure out what the max value is, and then return that value. Again, we want the number value here, and that's why we're using D.value right here. Okay, so we have that. As I save, this will auto refresh. You can see right now we still don't have anything going on. We just have an empty chart. Haven't appended anything, haven't created anything in the DOM. All right, the next thing we'll do is we'll actually start creating each of the bars that are related to each of the data points. So we can create a reference to the bar, and then we're going to start off by referencing the chart, which is our main visual entry point, our selection that we want to build upon. And then we're going to set bar equal to chart dot. Now we're going to use a select all call, and we're going to select all divs. Now again, currently the chart doesn't have any divs inside of it, but this is in this case a kind of pseudo or virtual selection. It is, I'm wanting to select data points, and then I'm wanting to bind them to divs that I will create. So now that I have the selection of the divs, we're going to give it the data that we're using with a .data call and pass in the data value that we have. Again, that data value gets passed in up here. It's read from this file and then passed in as a data parameter. So we're reading that into this data call, binding it to the bars. D3 then has a .enter. Now we saw this before with our joins of the green text coming in. Anything that's entering the scene or entering the DOM, any new data that we get, we're then going to append it. And what are we appending? We're wanting to append it as a div. Now on this, we're going to want to set some attributes on these divs. You know, we have custom colors for what is a bar chart, what are bars, what maybe labels that we have in the bar. So we're going to add an attribute. And this is very similar to jQuery. We're just doing a .attribute. On the class attribute, we are going to add bar and CF. Now CF is just a clear fix. Actually, I don't even need that here. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. All right, so we have an attribute bar, and then we're going to set the style on the bar, and we're going to set the width. Now on the width, we need to loop over each of the values that we get. Again, D3, since we already have this dot data, any of these parameters, we can loop over what that data is. So here, each parameter, we have the data reference. We can loop over the whole data set. And for each div that we're adding, we can set the parameter. And we always set it with a return. So we wanted to make sure it comes back as a number first, or we're going to evaluate a number. And that is the value parameter, that is this data object, divided by the max value. So the max value that we set up here, if we have 100 as the max value, it will be divided by 100. And once we get that decimal number, we then need to multiply it times 100 to get a percentage. So let me go ahead and set this up as one parameter and then multiply it times 100. D3 does have a lot of math, so there are math issues involved. So, you know, there are some pie charts that you'll create and you'll have to calculate arcs and angles. There are many great samples on D3 that I've already shown you, but again, we'll continue to look at those as we get through this series. So we have our number created. Again, the value, whatever it might be, if it's 50 divided by 100, we know we'll get 0.5. 0.5 times 100 will be 50%. All right, so that'll return the value for the width. All right, let's go ahead and save this and see what happens. So I save it, and you'll see that over here I have the bars. I have the width set, but I can't see anything. Now that's where the other side of the story is CSS. So when we're using divs or other common elements, we will need to have CSS along with the elements that we create. So let's go ahead and do that so that we can see the changes from here on out. All right, so we're going to go up into here and add a style block. And just so you can see all the styles, I'll go ahead and just do it here. And we're just going to say anything inside the chart that has the bar class. We want the background color to be steel blue, which is one of the values. Next, we will, we're going to go ahead and set this to position relative. You'll see that in a minute. I'm using absolute positioning on the text. So I need to make sure that it all stays within the bar div. All right, then I'm going to set each of the bars height equal to 40 pixels. If I save this, you'll see we'll have some color, but they're all stacked on top of each other. Can't even see which one begins and ends. So we don't want a maze, so we're going to add margin top. Well, we could do margin bottom. Let's do margin bottom. If I can type margin bottom, we'll set that to 5 pixels and save. And now we have our bars separated out. Now, the one thing you'll also notice is right now we're getting the values in the order that they're loaded. So we're getting 100, 50, 30, and then 75. And you'll see that here. 75 gets loaded fourth. D3 has a handy function for sorting and sorting the values ascending or descending, and we'll get into that. Let me go ahead and show you how to do that. So all we need to do is sort our data before we start appending our elements. So I'm going to call the data, and then there is a sort option on that data. And this is pretty much exactly like you would do it in just standard JavaScript with a sort where you pass in 2 parameters. and then you return a value minus the other value. So in this case, we're going to do minus second value minus, and as we saw before, since I've already converted the data to numbers, I really don't even need to do these numbers attributes. For me, it's just a common habit in some cases, where I always just want to enforce and make sure that I'm getting number comparisons. All right, as I save this, you see that now we have the elements sorted descending. So 100% is the top, and then we're going to lower and lower values. All right. Now, let's move on. So now that we have a reference of each of these bar elements, okay, so each of these bar elements are referenced by bar. So since we already have that, we have data appended to each one, we can then do other manipulations. We can create sub-elements within those DOM elements by just attaching to the bar. So in this case, I'm going to do bar.append. And then I'm going to create a span. I'm going to give it an attribute. And this will be our label, our main value label. So 100, 75, 50. So let's give that a label class. Now we're actually going to append some text. Again, D3 has a number of helper values. In this case, I'm wanting to actually create text, a text node, text element within the span, and I can use a .text, just like jQuery has a .text. It also has a helper function, much like jQuery, which is .html if you need more complex information. But in this case, all we really need is text string. So we're going to loop over our data just like we've done before, passing in the D reference and then getting the value. So in this case, the value will be that number that we have in our data, value 100. I will save this, see what happens. Okay, so we have the spans in here. By default, they'll just be top left and plain black text. So let's go ahead and style that label. So we're going to style anything with the class label. And we're going to style it with, we're going to make it white. Let's make the position absolute. And we're going to move this all the way to the right so it's on the right side of each bar. That's nice to get all these notifications at once. All right, so the labels are now on the right hand side. Don't quite like how that is. Let me go ahead and move these down somewhere in the middle. All right, and I'm actually going to change all of my font, all my fonts to Arial, just to have a better clean font. All right, so we have our values on the bar now, getting closer. And then the other thing that we want to do is grab hold of that other attribute in our data, and that's the name. Now we could do this in many different ways. We could do a title attribute on hover, but just so we see the data, I'm going to append another span. And here's a copy and paste. You know, why work slow when you can copy and paste, just as long as you change the critical elements. And I'm going to change that to class name. And then I'm going to reference the name. It's the name attribute in the data set, so this name column. All right, once I save that, we will have a new span. All right, and here they are by default, each of the names. And to match up with what we did earlier, let's go ahead and style that as well. Might as well copy and paste this. Why waste time? Change it to the name attribute, and instead of moving it to the right, we're going to move this to the left side. And then just to kind of not call a major amount of attention to it, let's just set the opacity to 50% with 0.5, and then it'll have a nice little see-through effect. All right, so there we go. We've created a bar chart using divs. In the next video, I'm going to create the same bar chart using SVG. SVG has its own level of complexities, and to make it responsive is a little more work than using just percentage divs like we have here. But you'll see that SVG also has many other options in creating things that are not possible at all with just straight div elements, and then the styles get too complex using base elements rather than creating something with SVG. So hope this tutorial helped you. Feel free to comment below, ask any questions. I can give you any kind of reference links to get more information. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.